So if you're looking at creating like a unique world, where do you personally look for inspiration?
So I like to start really small when I'm creating my own worlds. Like for instance, I love food, I love music and fashion and all these little things. And I feel like these little details, when you start putting them together, they end up becoming something bigger. So for instance, when I started out with Spin the Dawn, some of the things that I started out first were like dishes that my grandmother used to cook for me when I was little. And just from there, like I added some magic, obviously, and then like decided to base it on one of my favorite historical time periods, which is the Silk Road. And then it just like, for me, world building has a lot to do with nostalgia and things I love. And so just adding those together plus like a dash of magic is how I tend to come up with my fantasy worlds so far.
Yeah. What would you say like some of the like different parts of your life, say maybe say from your family or friends? Do you put those into your stories as well?
Yeah, I
Like,
definitely do. I don't tend to have characters that are inspired by people that I know too much.
mhm.
But I definitely like there are moments in my life where which have inspired like situations that my characters are involved in. And definitely my grandmother, for instance, had a huge influence on Spin the Dawn because she was a seamstress when she first moved to the US. And so that was how I came up with the idea of having a seamstress as a main character. But of course, my grandmother didn't have like magic scissors or like enchanters and people turning into animals.
Mhm.
I think just the little seeds of ideas often come from real life and from the experiences I've had.
Definitely, it's very fun. Also, you a lot of like Six Crimson Cranes and Spin the Dawn are both based on fairy tales, right? And I
Mhm.
in your bio online, and it said that like you'd always loved fairy tales.
Yeah.
So I was wondering like what about them like speaks to you?
I think like along with a lot of the kids that grew up in my generation and like probably now as well, like I grew up on a lot of Disney. So like definitely the happily ever after fairy tales were things that I adored and devoured as a kid. And I think just like the appeal of fairy tales is universal. There are so many different versions, for instance, of Cinderella across the world. There's something very like appealing about these stories, especially the stories that are about young women finding adventure, finding love, finding acceptance. Just and I think that there's just a lot of room for these stories to be reimagined today and to be fleshed out. And so that's something that's always appealed to me. For Six Crimson Cranes in particular, I always love that the hero in the Wild Swans fairy tale, she doesn't like rely on a prince to kiss her or rely on anyone else to break the curse. She does this all by herself when her brothers are turned into swans. And something that I also wanted to flesh out from this fairy tale was the stepmother. In the original fairy tale, the stepmother, like she has no motive for turning the princes into swans or cursing the princess. It's just like they just say, oh, she's jealous of all the time that the king is spending with his children. So she decides to turn them into swans. And that just seems a little petty. So I think when I had the chance to reimagine this fairy tale, I wanted to give her the stepmother more depth and more motive.
Yeah, it definitely made it much more interesting to like see her analyze her like her stepmother's decisions and then their little like reunion at the end. Anyway, I
Mhm.
read it, but um I was wondering, so in like both of your books, in your books, you have strong heroines who like I guess make their own path. You mentioned like the heroine in Six Crimson Cranes, like she doesn't rely on anyone else.
Mhm.
Why do you think it's important for young readers to, especially young like female readers, to see strong heroines like that?
I think just in the past, like there's so many stories where the hero is this vulnerable and weak character. Like the princess is seen as vulnerable and weak and like just has to rely on somebody to break the spell for her, somebody to kiss her awake. And like she doesn't really have her own independence or autonomy. And that always bugged me as a reader of stories. Just because like also now as a mother of two daughters, like I want my daughters to know that they have that they have choices. They can make their own choices and they're strong and they don't have to necessarily rely on anyone to to be their hero. They can be their own hero. So I think that's important. I don't know.
No,
It's like this strong feeling.
yeah. Are there any other values of yours that you've incorporated into your books?
So there's a lot of little things that pop up into my books that I'm not necessarily conscious of as I'm writing, but then like later on I see them, like for instance, like little superstitions will pop up into my book. Like a lot of Chinese people dislike the number 4 because it's not, it sounds like death in Chinese. So sometimes I like make a little reference to that, or like other things in the story. But values wise, I think all my characters so far have really been very much like family oriented. So like Shiori is very close to her 6 brothers and like risks a lot to break their curse. And it's similar for Maya and Spin the Dawn. And so that's something that is a huge theme that runs across the story.
Yeah. What are some challenges that you faced in your writing career, and what helps you to overcome them?
So I think before I got published, there was definitely a lot of doubt that I would ever get published. And I know that this is something that a lot of aspiring writers like are probably struggling with right now. And there's like just a lot of self-doubt, a lot of like dealing with rejection. So like I got hundreds of rejections from agents and editors before I got published. And that actually, it was really, really tough at first. In fact, it was really hard. And I ended up just putting writing aside for a couple of years because I was like, oh, I'm not sure that I'm good enough to do this. And I'm not sure if I want to do this enough. So I think that was just one mental issue that a lot of writers, including myself, come across. And I think like a lot of writers have the similar struggles. Like we have writing block, we have lack of inspiration, we have a lot of like imposter syndrome for people who have already been published. I think it's helpful to have friends outside of the writing community who aren't writers and don't really know much about publishing, and to like have them be your support group. I think it's also helpful to have hobbies outside of writing. And yeah, I think most importantly though, once you do become published, just like eyes on your own paper. Try not to compare with people because jealousy can rear its ugly head. And like a lot of writers will talk about this, and it's just to be happy with where you are and just be happy with your writing. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you like put writing aside for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
What inspired you to go back? Like, why do you think writing speaks to you so much?
I think like I had originally been writing women's fiction, so not young adult. I've been writing like kind of like chick lit romantic fiction. And I still love it, and I still kind of want to write that one day. But the feedback that I had been getting from editors and agents was that they thought that maybe I might want to try writing for young adults because I sounded younger. And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting advice. And I think at the time, I just wasn't ready to try to switch genres. And I was also in grad school. So I was also kind of discouraged from having gotten all these rejections. So I just wanted to take some time to like figure myself out. And it took several years, but at the end of those years, I just like really missed writing again. It was just this like visceral urge inside me to tell a story again. And I told myself, well, even if I don't get published, I'm just gonna like write for myself, and like during whatever hours I have, just like write this story and like try again to get published. And if not, you know, it'll just be something that I can read and my family and my lucky friends. So it was just this like desire to tell a story.
Yeah. How do you organize your writing process? Like, do you just like start writing, or do you like to plan first? Like, how do you usually approach it?
I usually plan first. I don't like driving completely in the dark, so I usually write an outline. I don't always follow it, but I like to know, for instance, like where I'm going and like what the ending that I'm aiming for is. So I write an outline. I take a couple days to figure out like all the naughty plot problems in that, and then I just draft. And I hate drafting so much. It's my least favorite part of the writing process. It's like absolute torture. but I draft very messy, and I try to do NaNoWriMo. I don't know if you're familiar, but that's the National Novel Writing Month, usually in November. But I just pretend that it's November, whatever day it is in the year. And for a month, I try to write 50,000 words. And they're just like the worst words ever. I'll go back and read them. Like, this makes absolutely no sense. But it's just to get things on page. And then after that month, and I have whatever I have, this monstrous draft of nonsense, I start chiseling it into an actual story. So that's how I usually work.
No, that sounds fun. Like, when when you're just approaching writing, it's just actually never mind. That was not a real question.
Okay.
So like when you're like say like walking around or with family, when you like have an idea, do you like immediately write it down, or do you kind of just like hold on to it for a little while?
I definitely write it down. My longest conversation on the phone, like if you look at my iMessage, I'm constantly texting myself. So that's just like my way. Instead of my notepad, I'll have like a text record, texting myself like, oh, here's some ideas. And that's what I tend to do.
Nice. What would you tell yourself when editors would like reject you? Like what would you say that a teen should keep in mind when they're like first like really like sending out like manuscripts or whatever? And I know you said that like you're just doing it for yourself, but are there any like specific ideas that you thought?
Well, I think rejection definitely stings. I've definitely cried multiple times over rejections. So I think it is really hard to be rejected by editors, agents, whomever, even like a critique partner if they don't like your story. It always hurts. But I think when you're looking for an agent or an editor, you have to remember that you're looking for a partner who's going to champion your work and going to help you get published. And I think that when they reject you, like one way to sort of take some of the sting out is to tell yourself that you want to find the person who like absolutely loves your story like to bits. And if this person didn't love it enough, then they're just not the right person for you. So you just have to keep going. And I think that mindset helped a lot.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. How have you incorporated your background into your books? Yeah, that's
Okay. So I guess my very first book that I wrote, the chick lit book that I mentioned, was actually about music. So that one was about that incorporated like my background in studying music, and that's the only one that I've done that's been in that industry, I guess. Something that I've been thinking about doing in the future, but I haven't like come across it yet. So like most of the background that I've infused into my stories has been like my cultural background. I do a lot of I infuse a lot of like Chinese myths and legends. And one of the things I love to do is like just blend them with Western fairy tales. And they end up becoming a lot of Easter eggs that you might or might not notice. And that's something that I've personally loved to do so far. Like, and that's been really rewarding for me because when I was growing up, my parents like told me a lot of these tales and like folk tales. And they kind of went in one ear, out the other ear. I never really thought that they'd be useful in any way other than entertainment. So it's meant a lot to me to sort of record them into my stories and like braid them in so that like future generations of readers will be able to spot them and like put them close to their heart.
Yeah. What would you say some of like your favorite fairy tales are then? Like maybe besides the one you've put in your books or that you have put in your books?
Okay, so I guess some of the like East Asian ones that I've put, I put the Cowherd and the Weaver in Spin the Dawn, and that's like a story about star-crossed lovers, about a fairy and a cowherd, and they fall in love, and of course it's forbidden because one's immortal and one isn't. So the gods like punish them and separate them across the universe, but their love is so strong that one night every year there's like a bridge of magpies that connect them, and that becomes like the Milky Way. So I just like, I was like, oh, it's so beautiful and romantic and also like bittersweet. So that's something that I've always loved and incorporated. It's probably one of my favorites. Yeah, I'm a huge romantic.
You mentioned that you'd want to like write another like chick lit book. What do you think that would look like, or like what kind of like romances like are your favorite to incorporate?
You know, I haven't thought too much about what I would want to write because I'm still very entrenched in fantasy. I love fantasy. But like definitely in the future, I have like some like vague idea that I want to write another chicklet. I basically just like anything that gives me the feels. Like I'm very easy to please when it comes to reading other people's works, just not my own. So like if you just make me feel something, then I'm very happy. If you make me cry, then I will love you. And I cry pretty easily, so it's not that hard.
So this is unrelated to what we were just talking about, but with the stepmother's character in Six Crimson Cranes, where did you like, I guess, like find the inspiration to develop her character? Because like, was it just like you pulled out of your brain, or was there like a figure in your life or in other stories you read that like made you want to develop her in the way you did?
Oh, this is such an interesting question. So I actually wrote another book between Spin the Dawn and Six Crimson Cranes, and this hasn't really been announced yet, but it's basically a story about the stepmother when she was young. So I had that first, and then I decided to write Six Crimson Cranes. And so that background actually was what informed her character.
I read that. That sounds like very interesting.
Thanks, yeah.
Well, you mentioned that you loved fantasy, and I was wondering, like, what about fantasy do you love? Like, why do you love writing it, reading it, all of that?
I think it's just what I read the most when I was a teen. Like I was like obviously in school and studying, and like my high school life was very dull. So reading fantasy was just this escape to go to visit different worlds and like, I don't know, have tea with dragons or like fly and have magical powers and whatnot. And I think I liked reading books more than watching TV because you could just envision yourself in the story more. And that always really appealed to me, and like to be able to exercise my imagination rather than have everything fed to me.
I love it so
Yeah,
much.
me too. Do you write yourself?
I've been dabbling. It's more
Okay.
of just like I'll have a few ideas and I'll like scribble them down. Actually, this notebook that I'm writing down follow-up questions in, like it's just completely chaotic. Like if I like
that. Yeah.
what were some of your favorite fantasy books to read as a teen?
So back then I would look for any female fantasy writer I could find. We didn't really have a young adult section back then, so you guys are very lucky. But I read a lot of like Patricia Reed, a lot of Juliet Marillier, like Sharon Shin. Oh my gosh, I just read anybody that I could.
Yeah, so you mentioned that there's no YA section, and I know with like Book Talk, like that is a very like YA like focused platform, I guess, or like chat. And you have very strong presence online.
Oh, thanks. Okay.
Yeah, why interacting with your audience so important to you?
I think again, I'm showing my age, but back when I was a kid, it never ever occurred to me to like even write a letter to my favorite author. Like they just seemed like this cloudy, hazy presence and like rained books upon the world. I think it's very cool now that authors are available to their readers, and like you can go online and search for them and see like, oh, they went out for coffee today, and like, or they're signing books in this Barnes and Noble or something. I think it's a very cool thing, and I think like that we as authors are lucky that we can interact with our readers and like and see the impact that our stories are having on them. So I think that it's just like a way to connect us. Yeah.
What's something you want your audience to take away from your books, or like from maybe like an individual book? I'm sure there's different like themes from each that you think are the most important.
I think when I'm writing, I think for most of the books that I've written, I just really want my readers to like think of it as a comfort book for them. I want the books to bring them like mostly happiness at the end, and like this feeling of being warm inside. And like I think for myself, when I write, I often write with a touch of nostalgia, like for my childhood, for my family, for things that I've loved in the past, and writing is a way for me to record them. So I think I really want my readers to just like have that sense of comfort when they read my books and like reach for it on a rainy day or whatnot.
Yeah. Um, you guys like, is that why you like incorporating like some of your favorite things in there, like cooking and fashion and things?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think I don't know if I'll always do this, but for now, it's meant a lot for me to like include my favorite things in these stories, and like favorite fairy tales and favorite foods. I'm obviously gonna run out, so I might have to do something else soon. But for right now, it's really rewarding.
Do you incorporate like parts of yourself into your characters, or do
I
you try
think
to?
I generally stay away from that. I think with my I've read somewhere that a writer, when they first start writing, like their characters are more autobiographical. So definitely like in my earlier books, which will never see the light of day, there was a lot of myself in them. And I think with Maya, for instance, like our personalities are very different, but something that I sort of put into her was like she just works really hard. It's kind of a boring, bland trait that you don't see in a lot of heroes, but I really appreciate I really appreciated writing that into her, because I don't know, I just like, even though she spends all of her time like indoors sewing all day, that's something that she loves, and it's something that she wants to work hard on, and that's how I feel with my writing and how I felt with my music. So I hadn't seen too much of that in characters that I'd read in books. Like a lot of characters are off like fighting with swords and daggers and like stabbing people and shooting arrows, and I was like, well, that's not really my daily life. So
Are there characters that like you've read that where you would like identify with them, maybe like books where you that are like a comfort book for you because you like see yourself in them, or do you have any comfort books that are just they're comforting because?
I think most of my comfort books are comforting just because I think when I was younger, I didn't feel the need to find myself so much in books. Um, but I just liked reading characters who were having adventures and like having fun. So I can't think off the top of my head of somebody that I really, really identified with too much. But I'm sure there are some. I just can't think of any right now. Do you have any favorites?
Um, there I like Sarah J. Maas's series, A Court of
Mhm.
Thorns and Roses, Feyre. I
Okay.
like always like felt like a little more connected to her, and so like I've probably read that series like 10 times.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah, but like any book that's just like has like huge character development, I always like comforting to like see them like go on their own journey, and like I think like characters in books can be very inspiring, and like applying how they've like pushed through difficulties into your own
Mhm.
life.
For
I feel it's
sure.
my favorite
Yeah,
things.
that's a really good way to put it. Yeah, I love strong character development. I especially love when somebody starts out like really immature and then becomes more mature over the course of the obstacles they have to face. And like, yeah, I love stories like that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Shiori's kind of like that a little
Mhm.
bit. Like, yeah, I thought that her relationship with like Takan, I think, am I saying his name
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. How it's like she like says that he isn't someone that she'd usually go for because he was like too nice and thought, and she like ended up like really appreciating that later. I thought that was really cool.
Oh,
Um,
thanks.
um, how like just out of curiosity, how long would you say like it takes for you to like write like a full first draft?
I try to do that first draft in like a month. It usually ends up being like a month and a half now because I have kids, but it's the absolute worst first draft like ever. So no one, you couldn't pay me to show it to anybody. As for writing a whole book, I would say it takes me like around 9 months.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's different with each book because sometimes I'll start writing something and then shelve it for a little while because I feel like it needs time to grow. um yeah, one of the things that's been hard for me as a writer is that like I tend to just get so involved in a story that sometimes I just need to take a step back and come back to it in a few months. And that's actually a really good tip I find for when you're feeling blocked or when you're feeling sick of a story.
Yeah. What's your favorite part of the writing process? I know you said like the drafting part was like the worst. Like what would you say?
Okay, so I do hate drafting, but at the same time, drafting is very exciting. I'm not going to call it my favorite part, but I will say that drafting is very exciting because like everything is new, and I love the part where you're just like creating the characters and you're creating the world, and like anything goes. Where it turns really sour is when you have to start making everything make sense. So that kind of is awful. But my favorite part would probably be towards the end where I just like most of the words are in place and I just have to make it sound pretty. I like that part.
Yeah. You like earlier when you said that like you tend to like stay away from like making more autobiographical characters, and like I've seen that like online too, like authors tend to not do that. What would you recommend, like not making a character more about yourself, and why would you say?
I mean, it's really, I don't think there's any right or wrong way. You can definitely make a character more like yourself if you'd like. But I personally find it harder because I think when I was a young writer, one of the things that I really hesitated to do was to make my character suffer. So like my first stories, for instance, my character was just perfect in every way. Like they just were so good at everything, and like nothing bad ever happened to them. And I think that just doesn't make for an interesting story. And I think the further you can put yourself from the character, like the more struggles you can make them go through. I think it opens up your mind and imagination.
Yeah, I've seen like memes where readers will be like, do authors like laugh and like drink a cup of tea when they kill off the best character? Like, what would you say that? Like, how would you answer that? Like,
I
do you
definitely wouldn't laugh. I've actually like teared up a lot while writing death scenes, so I wouldn't laugh. I don't think I'm that maniacal. Um, like it doesn't bring me joy.
um, yeah, have like, how old are your kids? I was wondering, have they like read any of your books, or
No,
like what
they're
books
too
do you?
young. They're 3.5 and 1.5. So like they barely understand that I write books for a living. Um,
Do you read them stories? Like, what kind of stories do you like?
so they are entering their Disney obsession as well. Right now, they're really obsessed with The Little Mermaid and Cinderella. So my oldest will love any like Cinderella book, and there's of course a million of them. So I'm starting to teach her to read, and we'll just pick up like a Cinderella picture book, and like she'll recognize a lot of the words because they're sort of similar across books. Yeah, so that's where they're at right now. They really like their fairy tales as well.
I feel like it's a very universal thing. Like everyone like starts reading them first and like loves them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything that like you would personally want to tell your younger self when she started writing? Like any advice that you would give her?
I think definitely to grow a thick skin. I think, yeah, I still remember when I was writing the Sailor Moon fanfics, I posted them online anonymously onto this site just for Sailor Moon. And I would get these letters from people my age as well, like I guess middle schoolers, and they were mostly all very, very nice. But I remember getting my very first flame. And it was just like the most horrible feeling. I remember like closing the computer and being like, oh my gosh, I like can't write again for days. Like it's just horrible. But actually, I think in retrospect, that was a really valuable lesson for me, because you just know it's impossible for everyone to love what you write. Like, no matter who you are, you can't please everyone. And I think that's a good thing to learn in life, no matter what you are, like whether you're a writer or like a fashion designer or a teacher or anything, like there's just no way that you're going to please everyone. And I think you just have to learn to be happy with what you write and be happy with yourself. So I think that's something that I would have told myself, because I think I was very much seeking the approval of other people.
Yeah. Would you say that's like a theme throughout your entire writing career, like feeling confident, I guess, in your own writing, or has that kind of time?
I think that is something, I don't know that whether that would be the overriding theme of my writing career, but definitely like something that I've always thought about in the back of my mind, like just to learn not to care too much. And I mean, to tell the story that you want your readers to read, and something that you're proud of and you're happy with.
Nice. Are we gonna do a Q&A as well? Or any questions? You guys have any questions, maybe? Nope. No questions.
Okay.
Yeah, is there anything that like, is there anything like you want me to know about writing, or that like you want teens in general to know about, maybe like why writing's important, or just like, okay, actually, other question. When you're writing a character, how would you say you like get into the mindset of like thinking like them and like writing as if like writing their voice in a story?
I think it's helpful to put myself in a situation. It doesn't have to be one that's in a book, but like I might put one or two of the main characters in a situation, like have them fight over, I don't know, an orange or something, and like kind of act out how they would act. And I think that just putting that scene in your mind and writing it down is really helpful. And it's very low stakes, because like this is not even going to be in the book. But I think that's a good way to do it. I also think I don't know, I used to draw my characters when I was younger. I'm not an artist, but just to like see what they look like and kind of get a feel for them. I think those are always. I also tend to read my dialogue aloud when I'm writing. So my husband is just in the other room in his office, like, and he'll just be like, "Who are you talking to?" And I'm like, "Oh, myself." Yeah, these are just my little quirks.
I read in the like the thank yous in the back of Six Crimson Cranes that like you'd like a thank you to your husband for like reading your books, I think. Does
Yeah.
he like editing comments and things like that?
He is my, I guess, alpha reader. He reads my stories before anyone else, and he's like very brutal. He will take this red pen and just like go through the whole thing, which is great, but it's definitely made me cry as well. So I'm just like, oh, why are you cutting this part out? Like, oh, why do you think this character is bland or boring? But he's usually right, like 80% of the time. So it's helpful, I think, to have that person that you trust like read your books as well and read your stories. For me, my best beta readers have been non-writers. I know that most writers will give their stories to other writers. So it really just depends on what you're comfortable with. But I do think that having like an extra pair of eyes look at your story is really invaluable.
Yeah. Like you said that like you think it's really important to have like a community of non-writers, like outside of like just in general, but writing community, like how would you say that's helpful or not helpful, I guess?
I think it's really helpful to be a part of that writing community, because like, or I think writers can be incredibly supportive of each other, and like obviously non-writers aren't going to have any idea what you as a writer are going through. Like my friends don't really understand what I'm doing at work. They just think I'm like tapping at my keyboard all day, when really there's so much also like agonizing and like brainstorming and just like lying down on the couch trying to figure out a plot twist or like something that doesn't make sense. So I think writers can be really helpful also with like figuring out story ideas, and like just helping each other, I think is really important, and like giving each other the encouragement that you need to like keep going on, or before and after publication. It's like, it's a great community to be in.
When you get like say frustrated or something with like a certain part of the book where it's like nothing makes sense,
Mhm.
or like you just don't really know what to write next, what do you do?
I usually try to unravel back. Like, if there's a problem in the book, usually it happens before the problem. So I'll save a new draft and just kind of delete that entire section and try to rewrite it. And usually the problem will solve itself, not always, but usually. And then I try to go from there. If it's more gnarly than that, then I just like need to take some time away or like talk to someone about it. Yeah.
When you're writing, do you try to take like breaks during it to kind of like take a step back, or do you just like go all at it for a day and then like
I
how
usually have a goal. So depending on where in my process, I will try to finish that goal every day. So like if I'm drafting, I'll say, okay, I'm going to write 2,000 words today. And they can be bad. They can be any part of the book. They can be about anything as long as they're 2,000 words. Then that's my goal for today. And once I finish that goal, then I'm done. When I'm editing, for instance, I'll say, oh, today I'm going to edit chapter 26, or I'm going to work on so-and-so's voice in this book, or I'm going to work on world building. Like, I tend to have a goal, and that helps me organize my day.
Yeah. What are like you said that it's important to have hobbies outside of writing. What do you do to like get away or like just stress relief or just have fun like on the side?
Before I had kids, I used to work out more. I used to go cycling, I think, and that was like a nice way to get my mind off things. I would also like go on walks in the city. I live in New York City, so that was really helpful. Now I don't have as many hobbies because my kids are really young, so my hobbies are really just taking care of my kids. But I do like still play some piano. I'll sing with my kids, and I'll like bake cookies and bake desserts for them, which is kind of fun as well. So yeah.
Nice. Would you say that like when you transition your career path, was that a very difficult decision to make, or did you feel confident, I guess?
It was definitely difficult. Like going from music to writing, it was difficult, I think, like internally as well, because I had sort of been planning all my life to do music, and I'd gone through so much school to do music that I felt like I was betraying myself when I decided to do something else. So it took me a while to make that transition, and I definitely didn't become like a full-time writer right away. I was still working in music and doing that on the side. But I think just eventually, um, when my book did okay on the market and I had a new contract, I was like, okay, I'm going to try to make this work, and I'm going to put music on the side for a while. And so, yeah, it just happened naturally, just over a long period of time.
Yeah. Do you ever miss it? Like you said that you sometimes play piano.
Mhm.
Would you say you miss it?
I don't miss it too much because I was a composer, so I wrote a lot of music, and I find actually that writing books uses the same part of my brain. So I thought I would miss it. Sometimes it weirds me out that I don't miss it, but I don't miss it so far.
Yeah, that's really cool because you said that like your favorite or one of your favorite things about music was like the story associated with it.
Yeah.
Are there any, I guess I don't know that much about music, but are there any like compositions that you really enjoy for the story? And like,
So I guess film score wise, like I definitely have like a lot of favorite film scores. I studied classical music mostly in school. So like a, during it depends on the time period, but in certain pieces will be based on like poems or like stories even. And I always found it really interesting to write a musical piece based on that. And like, for instance, you have opera, like there's even a Cinderella opera. So like that was, I guess, my foundation for learning music and narrative.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's always still been really close to me. And but I don't miss the part of writing music anymore. I think it's just like writing in a different language. Instead of writing music, I'm writing words.
You've mentioned Cinderella a few times.
Yeah.
What about Cinderella do you like so much?
I think I've just been watching it a lot with my kids. But I've learned to appreciate, like, I guess I've learned to appreciate that the hope it gives to young girls, and like the fantastical nature of like this girl who it's given a really hard life, and like she's like an orphan. Her stepmother and her stepdad are really cruel to her, and she just doesn't have much. Like she's very lonely, and I appreciate that. Well, I think I do have issues with this fairy tale because, like, obviously you don't have a fairy godmother or magic in real life, but I do appreciate that that there's hope in this story and that she has like her happily ever after. What I do really like is the potential in this story to like have the hero create her own happily ever after. And that's something that I tried to play with in my twisted tale for Cinderella.
Yeah, I think like with a lot of fairy tales, like people like do the problem solving for the main character.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think like do you try to like change that where instead of like an outside force coming in and solving the problem, like your characters make their own decisions? And
Yeah, I think that my way of storytelling, I think I do prefer to have the character figure it out themselves, even if they fail, or if they need help from other people, just that it's not entirely by like nature or like I want them to have some sort of part in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think your characters would be friends with each other? Like,
I think so. Yeah, I think that. Oh, sorry.
I was wondering, like, which characters do you or even? Yeah.
I think, let's see, who would I think? Okay, so Disney characters aside, I guess like I feel like Maya and Shiori could be friends. I don't know that they'd be best friends, but I think they would hang out and have fun, like, and like, I don't know, try dresses on together or like make mischief. I don't know.
Yeah. I feel like that's something like readers think about when they like read
Yeah.
like author
Well,
work.
no spoilers, but there is a bit of crossover in the next book, The Dragon's Promise.
I think it's in the same world. So
Yeah, it's in the same world. So one of the characters from Spin the Dawn's actually in book 2. I'm not going to say who, but yeah, there's a bit of crossover. So you'll see my question answered.
yeah. I recently read a book where there was a crossover and I was literally like screaming for like 10 minutes. I was so excited. So yeah, that will be fun.
I love crossovers.
Um, would you say like you take any inspiration from where you live and put it into your books?
So currently in New York City, I don't take too much inspiration. I just feel like there's a lot of books that have already been written that are based in New York City. But I did live in Japan for a few years when I was younger. So I definitely think that some of the world building from my time there like trickled into Six Crimson Cranes and Spin the Dawn a little bit.
Yeah.
I would definitely be interested in writing a place like sort of based on New York City in the future, just because like I feel like I know it pretty well now, but I haven't had that opportunity yet.
Yeah. What parts of Japan did you like put into your books?
I wouldn't say that I put in like specific parts, but I just put in like I guess the overall feelings that I had. Yeah, because it's definitely not like Japan, but maybe like an architectural aspect here and there, or like some of the castles that I visited inspired, for instance, like Shiori's home.
Yeah. Um, is there anything that like, say, so you mentioned that you really enjoy like cooking and like incorporating cooking into your books.
Mhm.
What do you like, what about cooking do you think is like important, or like why do you love it, I guess?
I mean, I think cooking is special because like everybody has to eat, right? And like every day we tend to eat 2 to 3 meals, and they often are just times to be with friends, to be with family, or by yourself. Like it's just something that you enjoy. This is like a universal activity. So I think that in my books, like I love to use food as a way to connect the characters and to also like show bits about them. And so, especially in Six Crimson Cranes, like Shiori's fish soup, for instance, is a way that connects her to her mother. And it's like something that she loves to cook. It's like the only dish she knows how to cook. And whenever she cooks it, she thinks of her mother. And for me, that was just like a vehicle to show more about her past and her longing to find um, her parents. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, like when she cooked the soup, she'd like sing.
Yeah.
Would you say you like how music connects people as well?
Yes, for sure. I mentioned that I haven't really written books, any books that are focused in music, but I do like to add just little cameos of music. Um, and for me, that's just like a way, again, yes, to connect people, to tell stories, and to show some traditions in this world that have been passed on over the years. So, yeah, I think that's one way I like to do it as well.
Yeah. That song, where did you like come up with it or find inspiration for it?
It it was in the book about the stepmother that I started, so that was something that I stole from myself.
Um, yeah. Yeah, I don't have any more questions. Is there anything else that you want to tell the teens of Chicago? Or
No, I'm just really happy to have had this chance to talk with you and with them. And yeah, I think for all the aspiring writers out there, just like keep at it. And um, I think persistence and luck are two very important things when it comes to getting published. So just like keep believing in your stories. And yeah, and then yeah, so thank you so much.
yeah, thank you. This was really awesome. And thank you everyone for joining us. And we hope you will check out the other programs this week. Thank
Okay,
you.
great. Thank you. Okay, thank you so much.